Thank you, Senator Portman,
Great.
and thank you to the Inspectors General for your service, your diligent work for joining us today. Appreciate this discussion of the legislation pending before the committee. I also want to drill down on a couple of specific issues within your respective areas of responsibility that you've identified as possible targets for reform legislation or change of practice in the executive branch. Mr. Horowitz, thank you for your collaboration and communication with my office as we've developed bipartisan legislation to reform the security camera systems in Bureau of Prisons facilities. I'd note that that legislation passed the Senate last night. You have also made recommendations with respect to single cell confinement for incarcerated persons with mental illness and recommendations with respect to pharmaceutical purchases by BOP facilities and costs of outside medical care. Could you briefly outline those recommendations to the committee?
Certainly, Senator, and I also noted that the bill passed last night that will, I think, have a potentially important impact on the prison camera system. So with regard to single selling of inmates, we identified significant concerns with how it impacted individuals' mental health at the BOP, the BOP's policies for how to deal with inmates who were disruptive. This is what it involved. It involved individuals who were disruptive and who the BOP put in special housing units and in some instances single-celled them. And that is something the BOP says it does not look to do, that it does not put individuals in solitary confinement, yet we identified numerous instances where that occurred. So we made a variety of recommendations that the BOP agreed with. As I sit here today, Senator, I don't know the status of those, but I can certainly follow up with you on that. On the pharmaceutical side and the cost side, we've issued a number of reports identifying how the BOP has not taken the steps it could take to reduce some of its costs so that it could save money in various areas that it's spending, particularly on the pharmaceutical side. And so, for instance, what we found is that there are 4 agencies that receive what's called the Big Four pricing, which is favorable pricing on pharmaceuticals, but that the BOP, even though it has one of the largest healthcare systems, if you will, because it has to take care of the 150,000 or so federal inmates, doesn't get that preferred pricing. And so we also have made the recommendation to the department that it consider coming to Congress to seek legislation to also be able to obtain that favorable pricing, which could save tens of millions of dollars for the BOP.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz. There's been some discussion at today's hearing about testimonial subpoena power and the ability to compel testimony from personnel who retire amidst or in advance of an investigation. Could you also comment, Mr. Horowitz, on some of the other issues related to retirement of federal personnel amidst investigation, how that can interrupt or terminate the investigative process, and the implications for their personnel records when they may seek employment once again in the same or another federal agency?
Absolutely, Senator. It's an issue that we've been very concerned about for years. In fact, we issued a report about this about 3 weeks ago concerning specifically how the FBI was handling adjudications of employees who had retired or resigned during the course of the investigations. So the way the process goes is we investigate, or the FBI investigates misconduct. It completes its work and sends it to the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility for adjudication, which is to determine what penalty or discipline to impose. And what we found is that the FBI regularly, with limited exception, closes its adjudication if an employee resigns or retires. And we found in 2017 and 2018 that that occurred in more than 10% of the cases. That's concerning because, as you indicated, what happens is, in many instances, employees resign or retire and then either get hired as contractors because they're working for a contracting office, or go to another government agency to work, or in the law enforcement case, might go to state and local law enforcement. And so it's important that the FBI and other Justice Department agencies and frankly across the entire federal government, that when individuals leave who have engaged in wrongdoing or misconduct, that those matters get adjudicated and that the findings be included in their personnel files. And I'll add, it also is important in the case where the individuals are found not to have committed misconduct because, by the way, in those more than 10% of the cases I mentioned, in some of them, the OIG had actually found that the individual didn't engage in the misconduct, yet they weren't cleared because, formally and fully cleared because the matter wasn't adjudicated.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz. Mr. Winters, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation that passed the Senate earlier this year included some significant investment in passenger rail. I'm a strong advocate for expanding passenger rail capacity in the United States, and particularly in the Southeast, to connect, for example, Atlanta, Macon, Savannah, Atlanta, Charlotte, Atlanta, Nashville, and additional commuter rail options for rural and suburban and urban communities across the state of Georgia. You've made recommendations and I think alarming observations with respect to the cybersecurity of Amtrak's train control systems. Could you please detail in my remaining time those observations and recommendations for the committee?
Well, in this public setting, Senator, I can't go into a lot of detail on it, and I would be happy to meet with you privately regarding some of those the particular details on that. I'll say this, that Amtrak is not alone, in terms of having challenges with cybersecurity. Train control systems, of course, are critical to the safety of passenger rail, and our office conducts very aggressive oversight in that space.
Thank you, Mr. Winters. My staff will reach out to yours to set up a classified forum to get into more detail on that. Thank you again for all of your service and your diligent work, and I yield back.